Hello, I'm Owen Jones. Who am I? I'm a writer at The Guardian, and I am an activist, I suppose. I've just done this new edition of Chavs, which has a new introduction, which kind of goes over what's happened in the last few years, because bizarrely, I find this a bit surreal, it came out 5 years ago, half a decade ago, which is terrifying. And what Chavs argued back then was against this idea that we're all middle class now, that the old working class had vanished, either it was aspirational and had become middle class, or else it was this feckless rump of lazy, work-shy, bigoted scroungers living on sink estates. And I wanted to challenge that false dichotomy. And what it also wanted to challenge was the idea that what were once traditionally seen as social problems, like unemployment and poverty, defects of an unjust society that needed collective solutions, had been turned into individual failings, that if you were poor or unemployed, it was your fault, you were to blame. And this was a very convenient way of justifying inequality. We focus constantly on the misdemeanours of the poor rather than the far more socially destructive behaviour of the people at the top of society. One of the things the book wanted to do is contrast the caricature of working class Britain and against the reality. This idea there's no such thing as being working class and all you have is the feckless scroungers or so-called chavs, whatever you want to call those people. What I want to look at is how it has changed, because you used to have an industrial working class. And I don't want to glorify that period, because these were often back-breaking jobs that often excluded women in particular. But this is when people, you had communities based around mines and factories and steelworks, and we've moved to a far more hire and fire transient service sector working class. So one of the biggest employers now is retail. Over 1 million people now work in call centres, which is as many as work down the mines at the peak of the mining industry. So these are issues that are very important, and it's about how the nature of the working class, if you like, has evolved and changed. And it's never been a homogenous group of people, and this is the reality that you don't see on your TV screens or in the newspapers. And for me, it's very important to show that this is the reality of modern Britain. People were ready to talk about class again because of an economic crisis which had obviously terribly affected millions of people, working people, where you had a government drawn from very privileged backgrounds disproportionately, implementing huge cuts which disproportionately affected people from poorer backgrounds. So the idea then that class didn't exist just looked like a nonsense. One of the things that has changed since I wrote the book is, I suppose, the left in its traditional sense has re-emerged as a political force again. It was very weak and fragmented when the book came out in 2011. After the general election in which the Conservatives won, unexpectedly, I think people thought the game was up for the left in Labour, that was it. And Jeremy Corbyn only put himself forward as a kind of sacrifice, which was to put policies and issues on the agenda. When he got on the ballot paper, he told one of his advisors, "Now make sure I don't win." So that was very unexpected indeed. And the fact he won with the biggest mandate in terms of the most open democratic contest Labour have ever had, if you told me that a year ago, I would have thought a meteorite hitting Earth was slightly more likely. But what has changed clearly is there is now an appetite for the left, and that's not just in Britain. In America, you've seen the rise of Bernie Sanders. In Spain, the rise of a new party called Podemos, only founded 2 years ago, which got millions of votes in the general election there. The rise of Syriza in Greece. But equally, you've seen the rise of a populist right. You've got a big polarisation that's happened in society, and the centre has found it increasingly difficult to hold in much of the Western world. I wish Chavs was less relevant, but I suppose tragically it remains as topical as it was. What the introduction is trying to show is that the problems I spoke about have got worse, that these policies are justified by the rhetoric I explored throughout the book, but this rhetoric has also got worse. But also to try and encourage people, because it sounds depressing saying all these things about how things have got worse and these policies have affected people in such a terrible way, and the rhetoric that's associated with those policies, but that it is possible to challenge these injustices, that things can change, and that is partly what I've tried to explore in the introduction. There's nothing inevitable about injustice, and there's nothing inevitable about a society in which so much wealth and power is in the hands of so few people, whilst millions of people often struggle in countries which are effectively, amongst the richest that have ever existed. So these are problems that can and will be overcome, but it needs determination, resilience and courage. We need to have that same determination, resilience and courage our ancestors showed, fighting against far more insurmountable odds and far greater injustices than we face today. And I firmly believe that if we have that same courage and determination, then we can overcome all the problems that I talk about and build a different society, not a society run in the interests of a tiny elite where we, instead of holding them to account, we're constantly blaming each other, but a society run in the interests of the real wealth creators, working people, the people who keep our country ticking day after day. And that is my vision of society, and I believe that is the society one day we will build.